What if the two most powerful ideas for changing your life were actually saying the same thing, just in different languages? One is 2,000 years old. The other was almost forgotten by history. And together, they might explain why you feel stuck, why you compare yourself to others, and why some mornings it's so hard to just get out of bed and feel okay. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to see yourself differently. Let's start with what they actually are. Not the textbook version, but the real, human version. Stoicism was born in ancient Greece, then grew up in Rome. It wasn't a philosophy for scholars sitting in libraries. It was a philosophy for people under pressure. Marcus Aurelius was running an empire. Epictetus was a slave. Seneca was navigating political power that could get him killed, and eventually did. These weren't people theorizing about the good life from a position of comfort. They were people trying to stay sane, steady, and decent in a world that kept testing them. And the core of what they figured out is this: you cannot control what happens to you, but you always have control over how you respond. That's it. That's the whole thing. And yet, sitting with that idea, really sitting with it, changes everything. Adlerian psychology came about 1,900 years later, through an Austrian psychiatrist named Alfred Adler. He was a contemporary of Freud, which is probably why history half forgot him. Freud had better marketing. But Adler was doing something quietly radical. While Freud was looking backward into trauma and childhood wounds and the unconscious, Adler was looking forward. He believed that what drives us isn't our past, it's our goals. It's the future we're unconsciously moving toward. And here's the part that tends to stop people cold. Adler believed that your emotions aren't things that happen to you. They're things you create to serve a purpose. That idea is uncomfortable the first time you hear it, but it's also, somehow, a relief. So what do these two schools of thought actually share? More than you'd think. Both refuse to let you be a passive victim of your own life. Both place the seat of power inside you, not in the world around you. And both are asking you the same quiet question, in different ways. Are you living according to what you can control, or are you spending your energy on what you can't? The Stoics called the things within our control our hegemonikon, our ruling faculty. Our thoughts, our judgments, our responses. Everything else, other people's opinions, the economy, whether your flight gets delayed, whether someone loves you back, that belongs to a different category entirely. And the Stoics weren't saying ignore those things or pretend they don't hurt. They were saying, notice where you place your energy. Notice where you've been fighting a battle you were never going to win. Adler arrived at a similar place from a different direction. He talked about the lifestyle, not in the sense of aesthetic choices, but the deep, unconscious map each person draws of themselves and the world. This map gets sketched early in life, usually by the time we're 5 or 6 years old. And once it's drawn, we spend the rest of our lives finding evidence to confirm it. If your map says, I am someone who gets overlooked, you will unconsciously move through the world in ways that produce exactly that result, and then point to the result as proof. It's not weakness. It's just how the mind works. And seeing it clearly is the beginning of something. Here's where they diverge, and this is worth paying attention to. The Stoics give you a framework for endurance, for meeting life's difficulties with grace and equanimity. When something goes wrong, when you lose something, when someone disappoints you. When the world doesn't cooperate, Stoicism gives you a place to stand. Says, this is not the catastrophe your nervous system thinks it is. You can bear this. And more than bear it, you can respond to it, well. There's a Stoic practice called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Before your day begins, you briefly imagine what could go wrong. Not to catastrophize, but to prepare. Not to create anxiety, but to dissolve it before it starts. Because when you've already imagined losing something, you hold it more lightly. You appreciate it more while you have it. And you don't crumble as completely when it changes. This is practical, elegant, and genuinely useful. and for a lot of people, especially people who struggle with anxiety. With overattachment, with the fear of what might happen, it's transformative. But Stoicism doesn't ask you why. It doesn't ask you what purpose your suffering might be serving. It gives you tools, not analysis. And sometimes, tools aren't quite enough. This is where Adler becomes interesting. Adler introduced a concept that sounds simple, but hits very deep. The inferiority feeling, not inferiority complex, that's a misquote of his work. The feeling of inferiority. He believed that every human being, without exception, carries a sense that they are not yet enough, that there is a gap between where they are and where they could be. And he didn't see this as pathology. He saw it as the engine of human growth. The feeling of inferiority, handled well, becomes the drive to improve, to connect, to contribute. The problem comes when we try to compensate for it instead of growing through it. Compensation looks like perfectionism. It looks like dominance, control, chronic busyness, people-pleasing, the need to always be right. It looks like the person who can never rest because resting would mean confronting the quiet, and the quiet is where the feeling lives. Does any of that feel familiar? Because it should. It's very human. What Adler asks, gently but persistently, is this: what is your suffering giving you? Not in a cold or accusatory way, in a genuinely curious way. Because if your anxiety keeps you from trying new things, then maybe it's protecting you from the possibility of failure. If your sadness keeps you isolated, maybe it's protecting you from the risk of rejection. The emotion isn't the enemy. It's a message written in a language you haven't quite learned to read yet. Now, here's something worth sitting with. Both of these philosophies point toward the same destination, a life less controlled by fear and more directed by choice. But they take different routes. Stoicism says, change your judgment of the thing, and you change your experience of it. Adler says, understand the purpose the thing is serving, and you lose the need for it. One is about reframing. The other is about understanding. And for most people, you need a bit of both. Imagine you're terrified of public speaking. The Stoic approach would guide you to examine your judgment. You believe that stumbling over words or being judged would be catastrophic. But is it really? Would it end your life, your relationships, your worth as a person? Probably not. So the fear is based on a distorted assessment of the stakes. Correct the assessment, reduce the fear. That's clean, rational, and often works. The Adlerian would ask a slightly different question. What does avoiding public speaking allow you to avoid? Maybe it allows you to avoid being seen, being judged, being compared and found lacking. And maybe that fear of comparison has been with you for a very long time. Maybe since a classroom moment you barely remember, when you spoke and people laughed. And maybe part of you decided, quietly, that it was safer not to speak. Not because speaking is dangerous, but because staying silent is the lifestyle you drew on your map. Both are true. Both are useful. They're not competing. They're completing each other. So which one helps you more? Here's an honest answer. It depends on where you are. If you are in the middle of something hard right now, a loss, a failure, a period of uncertainty, Stoicism is your anchor. It won't ask you to examine yourself when you don't have the energy. It will simply give you a way to stand upright. It will remind you that this is temporary, that you've survived difficult things before, that your response is still yours even when everything else has been taken. There's something almost tender in that, underneath the austere reputation. Stoicism, at its best, is not cold, it's steady. And steady is exactly what some moments require. But if you feel like you're living a life that doesn't quite fit, if the same patterns keep repeating, if you keep arriving at the same frustrations with different people, different jobs, different places, then Adler is the one asking the better question. Because the Stoic tools might help you bear the pattern with more grace. But Adler is the one who will sit down with you and ask, why do you keep building this? What does it mean? What would it cost you to change it? And that question, hard as it is is the one that actually moves things. What's beautiful, when you step back, is that both of these traditions were built by people who cared deeply about ordinary human suffering, not abstract philosophical suffering. The daily kind. The kind that makes you lie awake at 3 in the morning. The kind that makes you scroll your phone for an hour when you meant to sleep. The kind that makes you rehearse conversations that haven't happened or replay ones that have, over and over, looking for the moment you could have done it differently. These traditions were built for that. For you, for the specific, quiet difficulty of being a person in a world that doesn't always make sense. You don't have to choose between them. In fact, you probably shouldn't. Use Stoicism to meet the day. Use it when you catch yourself catastrophizing, when you feel yourself reaching for things outside your control, when you need to return to center. Use it the way you'd use a breath, something you can always come back to, no matter where you are or what's happening. Use Adler to understand yourself. Use his ideas when you're ready to get curious about the patterns in your life, when you notice that you keep arriving at the same feelings through different doors. Let him ask the uncomfortable question, because the purpose of discomfort isn't to suffer. It's to point at something worth changing. And here's the last thing, the one that both of them would probably agree on. You are not your history. You are not the sum of what was done to you, or said to you, or taken from you. You are, right now, in this moment, someone who gets to decide what the next moment looks like. That's not a small power. That's the whole game, and you've had it all along. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Don't forget to like the video, and if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.